Verse 25 is arguably the most famous and important of Laozi's propositions on the doctrine of Ziran.
人法地，地法天，天法道，道法自然。
Humankind abides by the principles of earth. Earth abides by the principles of heaven. Heaven abides by the principles of the Tao. The Tao abides by the principles of Ziran. Tao Fa Ziran expresses a core Taoist principle. The Tao follows the laws, or the Dharma, of free and unfettered nature. If we look at the four paired propositions, we receive a deductive syllogism as follows. When we say the Tao, what do we mean? We mean that which governs over and also is heaven, earth, and humanity is the way of heaven, the way of earth, and the way of humanity. Ziran, then, is the universal principle or law that governs the Tao. Extrapolated from verse 25, Ziran refers to a universal law of nature and incidentally what we call magic science, noting that the path of least resistance is the path that prevails, and the path of least resistance is the path of one's true nature or true form, 真形. All that is the Tao has a true form, and abiding by one's true form, one's true nature, is the path of least resistance. As far as esoteric Taoist axioms go, this is one of the most important ones to bear in mind. Both the path of least resistance and Ziran are observations that nature wants to A. minimize energy expenditure and B. maximize efficiency. In nature, systems tend to take the route or follow the pattern that requires the least amount of energy or resistance. In electrical circuits, current flows through the path that has the lowest electrical resistance. In mechanical systems, objects and forces move along the path that requires the least amount of energy. In evolutionary biology, traits that provide the most benefit with the least cost, that maximizes efficiency with respect to survival and reproduction, are the traits that dominate. Chemical reactions tend to proceed along pathways that require the least activation energy, meaning that reactions will favor steps that are easier to achieve given the circumstances. In systems theory, processes within a system, be that biological, ecological, or social, etc., tend to follow pathways that require the least effort or resources to maintain equilibrium or achieve a particular outcome. Which is to say, first and foremost, Ziran abides by scientific principles, its naturalist philosophy premised on universal laws of nature and force, though of course there are many more layers to it than that. Chapter 16 of the Zhuangzi outer chapters talks about how the ancient ones practiced the way, the Tao, to cultivate knowledge, but then didn't leverage that knowledge in any self-interested way. Know for the sake of knowing, not for the sake of advantage. The ancient ones didn't dress up their knowledge with eloquence so as to present as all-knowing, wise, or virtuous. They didn't attain fulfillment by hoarding things or seeking riches. They attained fulfillment by finding joy in everything, without prejudice, without bias, preference, or partiality. The ancient ones were in the throes of chaos and confusion. There was no impedance, nothing to interfere with their ways, and so they were Ziran. Chaos and confusion in that line I just read sounds bad, but no, says Zhuangzi, it wasn't bad at all. Yin and yang were in harmony despite the chaos and confusion. Ghosts and demons did not cause trouble. Everything was Ziran, and therefore there was no evil. Why? Because nature is inherently good, benevolent. When we seek to compel our will, our impulses and desires onto others for self-gain, that's what creates evil. That's citing from both Zhuangzi and the later Dongzong Shu, a Han Dynasty philosopher. But I think we should clarify what we mean when we say good and evil, because it differs a bit from Western theology and philosophy. When we say good, we mean, okay, put crudely and in an oversimplified way, good wishes upon others. And when we say evil, we mean to interfere with or manipulate another's path. And so Ziran is a theological and moral doctrine as well as Wu Wei, delineating what it means from a Taoist perspective to be good, to be virtuous and moral. Their polarities, zi shi, which is to be self-righteous, to insert yourself, to insist on your way, and you wei, which is the opposite of non-action. It's, action driven by ambition. Your nature, the way you were born, that's good, that's great. To embrace your nature is to be virtuous. But insisting that everybody follow your way, that's bad, detrimental. Doctrine of Wu Wei non-action, that's the path of virtue. Willful, ambitious action, that would be the negative polarity to Wu Wei non-action. Ziran as a principle of Taoist thought is often mentioned hand in hand with the doctrine of Wu Wei. Wu Wei is the doctrine that guides you on the how. How do you ensure that you are aligned with Ziran? By comporting your thoughts and actions to Wu Wei. Whereas Ziran is like Dharma, a rule or law of nature describing the path of the Tao. Ziran is saying that this is what the innate quality of the path of the Tao is. Wu Wei is saying because Ziran is the innate quality of the path of the Tao, this is how you walk the path of the Tao to be in alignment. In that sense, Ziran is descriptive, describing what is, while Wu Wei is prescriptive, saying since this is the way it is, here is how best to navigate what is. Wu Wei is the revelation and spiritual and philosophical guidance on how best to make peace with the fact you are governed by the Dharma of Ziran. Ziran is the concept that when there is no interference or external influences on the nature of something, that nature will flourish, embodying its true name and true form. Ziran is the ideal state. Thus, you want to practice Wu Wei because Wu Wei is non-interference and not imposing external influences so that all things may flourish to embody its own true name and true form. Wu Wei is how you achieve the ideal state of Ziran. In the orthodox version of the Tao Te Ching, our very first opening introduction to Ziran is in verse 17. Now consider its context. The supreme sovereign is one whose influence is unseen. Next is the one who is beloved as kin, who is acclaimed with honors. Then comes the one who rules with fear, a reign of terror. And then comes the sovereign who is scorned. The last passage of verse 17 goes, with the work fulfilled, the mission done, all the people exclaim, this is called Ziran, and that is our first introduction to the term Ziran in the Tao Te Ching. That first passage of verse 17 lays out an ordering of political philosophies and styles of governing a kingdom from best to worst, which is to say that the greatest sovereign is one whose leadership and laws of order are an invisible influence. Next is the sovereign who is beloved by the subjects, who is popular. Then, not so good, third in ranking would be the ruler who reigns with terror. Worst of the four leadership styles is the sovereign who no one respects and who the subjects think is a fool. Since time immemorial, Chinese scholars have made the assertion that the Tao Te Ching is a book on the ideal political, legal, and military governance, somewhat similar to or comparable to Sun Tzu's Art of War, except that the Tao Te Ching is maybe a bit more high concept. A very different perspective and point of view on political and military governance compared to Sun Tzu, Zhuangzi. Verse 17 suggests that the best individual leader is one who is hands-off. In fact, so hands-off that people don't even notice that there are rules or an order being enforced upon them. They think they are making these decisions by themselves, on their own. Verse 17 continues.
信不足焉 有不信焉 忧兮其贵言
Without faith, there is nothing to have faith in. Ah, silence is the most noble of speech. The wording in that first line in classical Chinese makes it clear that faith is something that you must do. Faith is not just a belief, it's a practice. That's the inference in the word 足. That first line text
信不足焉
is to say, if you do not practice, act upon, show through behavior what you believe, what your values are, what your faith is,
有不信焉。
then that's pretty much the same as not having faith, because for the one who does not practice and act upon faith, there is nothing in your world to have faith in.
忧兮其贵言。
Silence is the most noble of speech, that reads, which is all to say that you speak more through your action than through your words. That line, without faith, there is nothing to have faith in, repeats itself again, verbatim, word for word, later as the concluding line of verse 23. Verse 23 is another determinative or defining text on interpreting Ziran. So this idea of without faith, there is nothing to have faith in, is integrated into the principle of Ziran. It's acknowledging that to actually implement and uphold the value of Ziran, you kind of have to have faith that everything is going to work itself out for the best. When you try too hard to control the course of events, that's showing your lack of faith. And if you lack faith, then does your life even have any meaning, any purpose? Oof, that's heavy. In Ziran discourse, we'll talk about the comparative analysis between how we describe Ziran per Laozi's Tao Te Ching versus the Zhuangzi. If you're ever like, who is who, most portraits of Laozi will be of him on a donkey, and most portraits of Zhuangzi are of him sleeping. There is a general consensus that Ziran means the nature of things, which is also to say, it is what it is. But what does that mean? When we talk about Laozi's concept of Ziran, we're looking to 5 key verses in the Tao Te Ching, which I'll outline on screen. This lecture won't cover them all in detail, but here's the nutshell summary. People's lives are and should be self-determined. Speak less, interfere less, embrace Ziran. The Tao abides by the Dharma of Ziran. Try as you might, you cannot force nature to go against itself. True control and mastery comes from Ziran. True form will always inevitably and eventually reveal itself. Or, put another way, to summon without summoning, verse 73. And finally, desires and bias go against Ziran. Unlearn what you've learned. Do not influence others. Instead, reveal to them their true natures, meaning one's true name and true form. Hopefully, you recall this slide on core Taoist beliefs from the Introduction to Taoism lecture. True names and true forms will need its own deep dive in a future video. Having preferences, prejudices, and bias is not Ziran according to Laozi. That is why the Tao Te Ching tells us to unlearn our learning, because what we've accumulated as learning is what's causing us to have bias, and that bias takes us further away from alignment with Ziran. Also, because those who are not the awakened ones, this word you see on screen, often translated to the sage, the saints, or the wise ones, before you can unlearn your learning, detached from materialism and desires, you really shouldn't be telling others what to do. So if you are not this, an awakened one, don't tell people what to do. And if you are an awakened one, you wouldn't tell people what to do. Now let's take a look at Zhuangzi's statements on Ziran. Pause the video to take down the references to find in your copy of the text, as this lecture will only gloss over the introductory level summarized meaning of a few excerpted passages. The mind and spirit should feel indifference. That is to be Ziran. Ziran does not mean being idle or lazy. It's about following your destiny. Do not let external forces deter you from what is your true way. Ziran is your true way, and when you let yourself get tossed around by forces that are unnaturally overpowering the force of your true nature, you're not being Ziran. Ziran is unsentimental. Innately, there are no likes or dislikes, no biases or preferences. Seek not to want more. Seek only to just be true to your true form, to be known by your true name. If you're a bit iffy about that point Zhuangzi made, mind and spirit should feel indifference, you're not the only one. Right there, in the text, a philosopher by the name Huizi interrogates Zhuangzi. If you're indifferent, meaning you utterly lack sentimentality, then you're not even human, says Huizi. Because to have emotions, which does incidentally mean to have bias and preferences, is to be human. Zhuangzi, after several rounds of circular, non-responsive responses, classic Zhuangzi, finally says to Huizi, we disagree on the meaning of terms. When I say indifference, I mean to fully comprehend that the Tao gives the countenance and heaven gives the form, the true form, 真形, which means whatever a person's true nature and true form is, that's of the Tao, that's heavenly, divine. And so you are to embrace it without judgment, without opinions or preferential treatment. Here's that oft-cited line from Zhuangzi that I just referenced.
道与之貌，天与之行。
The Tao gives the countenance, heaven gives the form. When we say countenance, we mean the appearance, the surface-level empirical interaction and exchange. When we say form, as in true forms, here we mean the essence, the deeper-level understanding, internal intuitive interaction and exchange. The Tao giving countenance is related to changeability, whereas heaven giving form is related to continuity. Your countenance is a nurtured path of least resistance, interdependent with your environment, whereas your form is the innate path of your personal nature you were born with, irrespective and perhaps even in spite of your environment. So what Zhuangzi is saying, at least as I interpret it, is that because the Tao gives you your countenance and heaven gives you your form, you are exactly the way you're supposed to be, so long as no one has intentionally, maliciously interfered with your path of least resistance. To make sure I continue to not interfere with your path, I acknowledge and embrace you as you are without forcing you to change. It is as if to say, by withholding judgment, you withhold discernment of good and evil from the narrow-minded human perspective of good and evil. That, says Zhuangzi, is what it means to be indifferent. That is Ziran. And so when we say human nature is inherently good per Taoism, it's this belief that your greed, lust, rage, hatred, all vices come from an external influence, comes from manipulation and interferences that are unnatural. Without external stimuli or causation, you would be none of those things. Here's a simple yet profound way of understanding Ziran. Ziran is when there has been no intentional interference or manipulation, and therefore it is as it would naturally and spontaneously be by its own accord. Imagine who you would be, what name yourself would go by, what form and what nature would be that selfhood if there was zero external influence or interference on the development of that selfhood. Let's take a look at the etymology of the ideograms for Ziran. The Zi of Ziran is a pictograph of the nose or pointing to one's nose, meaning self, origins, identity. Ran has the fire radical at the base of the word, like the inner flame enlivening consciousness, and then the radical for the moon, and then that of beast. Ran in this context is a demonstrative pronoun, as if to say this is what it is. That second character, Ran, to me is evocative of the fire that generates electricity, thermoelectric forces, the bioelectricity of neurons, the nervous system of biological organisms, and the electrical signals in your brain from the movement of ions. This is the spark of consciousness. But let's return to that first character for selfhood, or what selfhood means, as that is one of the key themes in the Tao Te Ching.
自然、自化、自朴、自正。
These are all concepts found in the Tao Te Ching, concepts connected to each other through Zi, the philosophical exploration of selfhood and identity, where selfhood and identity originate from. Ziran encompasses the three other concepts related to the self that we find throughout the text: self-transformation, the original essence of the selfhood and personal identity, and self-determined morality and ethics. Which is to say that one's nature and origins of that nature are the combined holistic totality of your self-initiated transformation, your becoming that original essence you were born with, and your self-determined sense of righteousness. How you, without external influence, interference, or manipulation, self-determine what's right to you and what's wrong to you. What Zhuangzi then said was, Wu-wei is your personal non-action, non-interference with other beings' paths, so that all may manifest their own nature, becoming, origination, and righteousness. The opposite of Wu-wei is to block Ziran with one's own view, having strong opinion, biases, and prejudice, one's own egotism or self-centeredness, lacking empathy, self-importance, and one's arrogance, which is to believe your way is the best way and all others are inferior to you. These three principles cause us to stray from virtue and also causes us to interfere with other people's virtue. Ziran is also insightful in the realm of spiritual mysticism and Taoist occult philosophy. This is the closed container sphere of your existence. This four-pointed star represents you. There you are, contained within and therefore limited and governed by the Dharma within this sphere. This animation represents the moving, changing tides within this sphere. Ziran implies that within the bubble, you'll want to move in alignment with the natural spontaneous flow. When you force movement against the natural flow, that's when we experience conflict, struggle, and take away from our own ability to thrive. But Ziran also implies that if you can transcend and thus leave that closed container sphere, then you will no longer be limited to the natural spontaneous flow within that container. You can move in any direction that you will and not incur conflict or struggle. That's supposed to be an animation of quantum entanglement and quantum superposition, to be the quantum anomaly, as it were. When you transcend the bubble, any movement you so choose is no longer incurring resistance from forces at play that were inside that bubble. And so you have two options. Go with the flow, taking the path of least resistance within the limitations of your physical world, which is exoteric Ziran. Because if you resist the flow, creating friction, you produce friction, conflict, opposition, strife, pain, suffering, life's great woes. Or the alternative, take the path, follow the way that leads you out of that sphere of limitations, no longer confined within the bubble of physical constraints, whereby anything you will is, by its nature, Ziran, esoteric Ziran, what's revealed by the hidden code, the penultimate of spiritual or mystical cultivation, to summon without summoning. Xuande, the hidden code, is that fourth cornerstone of Taoist beliefs, which are the body of guiding principles for attaining knowledge and understanding of the mysteries. Xuande, meaning the mysteries revealed to us by Zhoutian Xuanyu, the mysterious lady of the 9 heavens. If you've made it all the way through this video, first of all, thank you, you're a real trooper. And second, I would love to hear from you. After considering today's discussion, what are your responsive thoughts and impressions? What is your personal philosophy in comparison with Ziran?